Listen to The Barry Morgan Show. Live weekdays noon to 3 on CJAD 800 and CJAD.com.
Now, are you interested in joining a group called Anglophones for Quebec Independence? If you're hearing this for the first time, maybe I should repeat it. It's called Anglophones for Quebec Independence. Well, you can support this group, and the driving force behind it is Jennifer Drouin, who is in studio with me right now. Thank you very much for being here, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
So just a bit of background. You're originally from Nova Scotia, I believe.
I am.
And how long have you been living in Quebec?
I've been living here since 2001.
2001, and I guess you fell in love with the province like many other people do?
Fell in love with Quebec before I moved here, which is why I moved here.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Why are you forming this group? Because you know out of the gate that there are plenty of people in this community who are very upset at hearing that an Anglo is asking other Anglos to promote the idea of Quebec separation. So why, at the end of the day, are you in fact forming this group?
I'm forming the group to dispel the myth that all Anglophones are Federalist by default, because that simply isn't true. There has always been, there always will be, Anglophones who are in favor of sovereignty. Earlier today, I listed off a long list of them, beginning with the Patriots and the Nelson brothers, right up to the present day.
But you didn't form the group because there are some Anglos who support sovereignty. That's the reason why you formed the group?
Yeah.
That's not separation itself, but because the fact there are certain numbers of Anglos that support the idea of sovereignty?
There are Anglophones who support sovereignty, and the idea was to bring them together and give them a collective voice so that they are heard, and to dispel the myth that they don't exist at all, when in fact we do.
But you're supporting the entire movement.
Yeah, obviously.
Sure. So what kind of rights do you think, as an Anglophone, you would have in an independent Quebec?
I would have exactly the same rights that I have as an Anglophone right now.
How do you know that?
Because they have been promised and reassured multiple times by leaders of the sovereignist movement.
What kind of promises?
What
would happen to the education system?
The education would be the same. If I can go back to the promises, in 1995, when Parizeau pre-recorded his victory speech in case there was a yes vote, he explicitly recognized the rights of the Anglophone community as being a historic part of Quebec, and committed his government in a sovereign Quebec to protecting those rights. In 2007, when Daniel Turp proposed a constitution of a sovereign Quebec, he also explicitly mentioned the Anglophone community. And we have to remember that after a yes vote, there will be negotiations between Quebec and Ottawa. Ottawa will want to take care of and protect the rights of Anglophones living in Quebec, just like Quebec will want to take care of and protect the rights of Francophones living outside of Quebec.
You honestly believe that the rights of Quebecers, of Anglos, and the community, the institutions, education, healthcare, and so forth would be absolutely protected, when a lot of people will tell you right now they're not protected, that Anglos cannot do business in the way they'd like, that they get blowback from certain people just for speaking the language, and that's in a Quebec that is not independent these days.
I would completely disagree with that. And
you would disagree that Anglos can do business the way they like to?
I would disagree
that
the Anglophones in Quebec right now do not have rights, because...
Well, they do have rights, but they are limited rights.
Not as much as the Francophones outside of Quebec. Having lived 6 years on the French shore of Nova Scotia with Acadians, try to get healthcare services in French as a Francophone outside of Quebec, and you will quickly realize that Anglophones in Quebec have way more rights, way more access to service than Francophones outside of Quebec.
Well, that's what's happening outside Quebec.
I think the Anglophone community, we're very privileged as Anglophones living in Quebec.
If there aren't enough services for Francophones outside the province, that's not right. And there are certainly certain services in Quebec that are available to Anglophones. There's no argument there, but at the same time, like I said, there are definite restrictions on what Anglos can do in this province, especially when it comes to business and so forth. Speaking with Jennifer Drouin, she's the force behind this group called Anglophones for Quebec Independence. How many members does the group have?
We have over 36 members, simply recruiting by word of mouth. I know someone who knows someone. And in the last less than 24 hours since we announced that the press conference was happening, there's been another half dozen who have immediately wanted to join up.
Well, there were some comments earlier I saw from listeners that to really earn your stripes, that somebody has to really have lived here and lived the experience for the past 40, 50 years to know what it was like to grow up in this province as an Anglophone or as an allophone or as a francophone, and that effectively they question your judgment and even qualification for starting a group like this because you haven't. You're I'm using in quotations, my finger quotations, like an outsider. So what's your reaction to that?
I have several reactions to that. First of all, we're always talking about being welcoming to immigrants. Second of all, I've been living here for 15 years. Members of our group have been living here for 40 years or more. Their children live here. Their children are born here. Their children go to school here. And regardless of whether one was born in Quebec, everyone is a Quebecer when we go into the voting booth. My driver's license says I'm a Quebecer. My healthcare card says I'm a Quebecer. When I go into the voting booth and I vote yes, or I vote for a sovereignist party, my vote counts the same as someone's vote of someone who was born here. A citizen is a citizen.
Do you think Bill 101 is, or I guess you don't think that Bill 101 is enough to protect the French language and the culture?
Bill 101, as it was originally proposed by René Lévesque, was great. The Supreme Court of Canada struck down certain provisions of it. And, sovereign Quebec would be able to restore some of those provisions. But again, I don't see that as an attack on the Anglophone community. If anything, what I'm saying is we need to be building bridges between the two solitudes. And that's pretty much what I've devoted the last 15 years of my life to.
But how would that be accomplished by separating the two the province from the rest of the country? How do you build a bridge by separating?
Through dialogue. And that's what I'm doing right now, speaking in English to Anglophones about Quebec independence and giving them another side of the story that perhaps they don't hear very often.
And it's funny because earlier this week we were talking about the two solitudes because of businessman Mitch Garber, and his idea was we should bridge the communities. And I don't remember him suggesting that sovereignty was the way to go, that it was about bringing the communities together and taking advantage of both English and French because both are wonderful communities and can really work together. And imagine what this city would be like, what this province would be like if we didn't have these constant battles. Having said that, we're basically out of time.
Can I just say that we wouldn't have the constant battles if we resolved the nationalist question and we had independence? There would be no more debate. The question would be solved.
You think it would just be over like that? We tear part of Canada apart and that would be end of story. Everybody's happy, and then we just start a new chapter in our lives. I guess I appreciate your point of view, and I thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Jennifer Drouin. And in case you're interested, the website is
aqi.quebec, aqi.quebec.
aqi.quebec.
Or Facebook or Twitter.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thank
Jennifer Drouin of Anglophones for Quebec Independence.
News Talk Radio, CJAD 800, CJAD.com.